Welcome to Caliban Command. Today we're going to cover my Dark Angels paint scheme. I started with Chaos Black over in Infernus Marine. Now I do use the Horus Heresy colors despite paying $40k, simply because I like the aesthetic a little bit more. I think it's a little cleaner and it looks a little bit more striking on the table than the gold and green. I personally prefer using red a little bit more liberally than I think the Horus Heresy scheme colors call for, but I think it adds a nice contrast. First, we're going to dry brush Abaddon Black over Chaos Black. I do this with a makeup brush to save time as well as to achieve a very clean base coat. The makeup brush is a very cheap addition to my paint kit, and it's one of the few things that I don't get from Hobbytown. This has been done very quickly and is just a quick little tutorial. I make a couple errors throughout the video and I'll point those out as I go too. Starting here, I did not wait for my paint to dry. That was a huge mistake and it ends up causing me to have to go back over the Aquila again, but I'm still pretty happy with the results despite my errors. Here I'm digging out the detail work of the red for the Pyre Blaster, and then that will be the kind of start point of the gun itself. I usually do my higher points first and then dig into my lower, but in the case of the Pyre Blaster, it's a little awkward no matter how you do it. The bolt guns are a little bit more forgiving. Here I'm picking out shoulder trim, and I promise I'll get a little bit better at recording these as I go. I'm still really new to this, and I appreciate your patience with it. The red goes very slowly, and as you can see, I make a few mistakes here and there. I'll touch those up towards the end. Now, the ports above the power pack are probably the most fun part for me to paint. They're a spot that I don't really see picked out in a lot of artwork, and I really think it's a fun way to kind of put my own spin on the paint scheme, though I do think it sometimes makes it look a little Black Templar where I want Dark Angels, but I think the iconography really balances that out once the iconography goes down and gets picked out. After getting the trim and those sections done, we move on to pouches, which we'll cover in a second. I picked those out with detail and then went through and went back over the spots that I messed up. Now, I skipped the pouches because I should have used a bigger brush where I got into them, and I failed to do so, so it ended up taking me a very long amount of time to pick that out. Here's another space where I probably should have waited a little bit longer before I dug into touching up my paints, and that's a habit that I have that I need to work on. From there, we are going to continue picking out silver on the model. This is going to cover a very large portion of the gun, and then we will move on to the copper tone that I use. The silver was picked out with Iron Breaker. It's my preferred silver because I think an oil over it leaves a shinier product than over, for instance, Lead Belcher, and looks a little bit more clean and just fresh off the assembly line. I don't know why I like that look for my Dark Angels so much, but I really do, with the exception of veteran squads, which I tend to dirty up a little bit more. The canisters will also be painted with Iron Breaker, just to keep the aesthetic looking clean. They'll then later get a coat of Balthazar Gold over the iconography where it's visible. There is also a tactical marker on the Marine. I think it's an Auspex scanner or perhaps a heat indicator that I pick out in Iron Breaker as well. I couldn't reach the belt buckle, but it would normally be picked out with Iron Breaker as well before we move on to other colors. Now here I'm going back through and I'm doing some ports on the underside of the power pack and then the handgun. From there we're going to switch over to Balthazar Gold to pick out the muzzle of the Pyre Blaster. This is going to give it a nice copper look. I do make some slight errors here as well that I later try to cover up with Abaddon Black again. And honestly, I get into a rush once again and kind of cost myself more time than I saved by not waiting. Now, after the Balthazar Gold gets done, we'll dig into, I believe, the Abaddon Black touch-ups that I messed up, which, again, take your time. I get into a bad rush because I at this time juggle painting in about a 1 hour block per day, so I'm also competing with that time for my video recordings. I'll eventually get that straightened out to where I have more time to work on things, but for right now, I don't have a ton of time to do so, so I tend to get into a rush. That's a bad habit. I usually spend multiple days working on a marine. I don't in this video, and it kind of costs me, I think, a little bit of the cleanness that I like. From there, we're going to go on to the Nuln Oil coat, which is going to darken everything up and give it a grungy, darker aesthetic to it that I really still think looks clean once it dries. When I say grungy, I mean it darkens everything down. It doesn't look dirty so much as it looks well oiled and pristine and ready for battlefield use. The pouches get a little bit of extra Nuln Oil to darken them up and make them look a little worn. That's the leather detailing, I think, is the most appropriate place for it. Here is where I touched up my Abaddon, and that was a mistake because I should have waited for things to dry a little better. And I also try to, while that Nuln Oil is drying, touch up a section that I missed entirely on the backpack, and I honestly would recommend waiting until you have everything dry before you try to do that. I goofed, and that's on me. It shows in the end product a little, but I'm still fairly happy with the results. Now, the brush I use here is just an older brush that I like to use when I know that I'm kind of in a rush. It doesn't manage detail work quite as well as I would like, and I need to replace it here soon, and that's one of those mistakes that you kind of pick up on as you paint more, and I make a lot of mistakes still. I have only been painting for about 4 years in total, and not long enough to catch all the mistakes that I wish that I could. Now, this last step I end up going through and hitting the helmet lenses, and I'm still getting used to my camera setup, so I end up doing a lot of it off video, and I apologize for that. Anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and now we're going to move on to our sponsor. We're going to talk about Hobbytown now. They are the sponsors of our channel currently, and they have a phenomenal array of painting tools. They have paints, they have models, they have everything that you could possibly need. Not to mention, their staff have always been super knowledgeable about anything that I've picked up there. They've made some recommendations for how I could improve my hobby flow. They've gone through the effort of helping me find a starting point in 40k in a faction that I love. I've played Dark Angels now for years, and that's largely thanks to them helping me figure out what faction fit me the best. The series as a whole has been a blast to work with them on. They've helped me find stuff for Age of Sigmar that I enjoy. They've ordered stuff in that I haven't had access to before. They've helped me find paint alternatives when they didn't have a Citadel paint that I needed. They've helped me find new board games to play. It has genuinely just been a really helpful crew to work with. They stock Army Painter, GW, Testers, Tamiya. They have Mission Models paints, which I got the pleasure of trying out recently and had a really great time with. They stock Gundam kits, anime kits of various types. They have the Vallejo paint line, which I use a lot when I do Gunpla to just really bring out some neat color combinations with. They have all kinds of fun in there, and I genuinely cannot recommend the store enough. I hope you guys check them out. Even if you can't find a local branch, I hope you check out their online store at hobbytown.com.